Hey guys, welcome back to HotS Thoughts. Now, I'm gonna be honest, this is about the fourth time that I've done this video, but I really wanted to talk about the Valla rework for a while, and the problem is every time that I get into doing this sort of stuff, whenever I start to kind of come up with ideas and start to get it talking, I realize there's so much more that I have to talk to you. So, apologies for getting this out late. I know there's been a lot of talk in the community already, but hopefully this can be somewhat of a definitive guide to the Valla rework, because there's a lot to talk about. I'm just gonna jump right in. There's so much to talk to. First of all, I just want to talk about the reason for the Valla rework. I personally don't think she needed a rework, especially since she's been well known for being very versatile and a very balanced and good hero for a long time, and I'm not exactly sure why they decided to rework her at all. But according to the developers, the roots of this redesign have been floating around the design bullpen for about 6+ months. After some initial testing, we felt we had to pull the trigger and get it out to you. Similar to Zagara and other large reworks, we do not change the feel of the hero. Valla users should feel completely at home while playing her. Our main goal was to increase the potential for amazing Valla players to differentiate themselves from the mediocre one, and aimed the majority of these changes toward lifting her skill ceiling. Believes that players will still be able to build Valla very similarly to the ways they have in the past, but with more interesting and potentially powerful payoffs. So that's their reasoning behind it. I don't necessarily agree with it. The big overarching things that I've seen is, so her baseline damage got pretty greatly reduced, but she scales way harder. So what you'll find with pretty much all of the builds that she has, which by the way, she still has the standard Q build, the standard W build, the standard auto attack build. They are like the developer said, they are very similar to the pre-rework Valla. But she scales a lot better now. Her early game is very weak. Her early mid game are kind of atrocious. But once she gets to the late game, she can really dish out some crazy damage, especially with the auto attack build. The other thing is, like, most of her talents are actually pretty good now. There were a couple in the old Valla build that you just never took. So for instance, if we look at it, talent calculator. So like one of the things that we almost never saw was a lot of people got caltrops. I don't understand why. There wasn't a lot of vigorous assault. To be honest, actually all of them were good. The only, I guess, stone skin was like super niche. Almost no one went stone skin. But for the most part, everyone, like every one of Valla's talents to begin with, was pretty awesome. The new talents are pretty much the same. A lot of them are amalgams of older ones. But they're pretty much good for the most part. And the biggest thing that I've noticed overall is that she's a lot more consistent than she used to be. She was a very high risk, high reward after the scaling changes, in my opinion. She basically became the typical glass cannon. She did a lot of damage, but she died really easily, and that's the reason why she kind of fell out of favor. She was just dying way too easily compared to someone like Greymane, who has more health than a lot of than any other, assassin in that class. So the thing about Valla is she's always been really bad on the health side. They didn't really change that, but they gave her lots of ways to kind of stay safe and do a lot more poking from behind. I just want to go over some of the main changes that we saw. Basic attack damage reduced, but the hatred stacks increase. So basically that means it takes her longer to ramp up. Everything is based off of hatred now. Hungering arrow cooldown was reduced, range was increased. It basically now it will prioritize heroes, but it does a little bit less damage. Basically, it no longer tracks the heroes, so you actually have to aim the hungering arrow, which is kind of annoying, but I think it's more skillful that way. Multi-shot, I think, got a huge nerf overall because even though the damage went up pretty significantly, the cooldown also went up correspondingly. So I think it's not as good as it seems. Vault got a huge buff. Vault is much better now. And that solves some of her mana problems by reducing the mana cost. That was one of the big things before, is when you use Vault, it was so devastating because your mana pool was just gone afterwards. She still does have a few mana problems, but it's not nearly as bad as it used to be, especially since you don't take searing attacks anymore. Rain of Vengeance is now a single cast, instead of you being able to cast it, and it just hits 2 or 5 times depending on the level it's at. In some ways this is a buff, in some ways it's a nerf, because she kind of has to stun herself in order to actually make it work. And I'll show you guys that a little bit later, but she kind of stuns herself. You can vault immediately afterwards, which is kind of a cool trick. But otherwise, it's not as good as it could be. Before, you could kind of lay down the stuns and walk away from it. Now she kind of has to be rooted in place for a moment. Strafe got a damage reduction. It really doesn't do a lot of damage now. It pretty much tickles. And I'll go into that a little bit more. There's a whole bunch of stuff that they basically amalgamated a lot of things and put things together. Biggest thing on level 4 is Vigorous Assault, and Mana Core were removed or changed. Those are like really big power spikes. Daring Attacks was removed. That's a really big power spike. Let's see, Giant Killer was removed, and Tempered by Discipline got a slight nerf. It doesn't actually say it, but the old one used to do 30% of the damage that you did after you gain 10 more stacks after the 10 stacks of Hatred. This means you can start healing more quickly, but it actually got a downgrade from 30% to 25%. Frost Shot got a minor nerf, but also increases the range, so it's not too bad. 16 got destroyed. And then the 20s are really one of the most important talent tiers that I want to talk about. They removed Nexus Frenzy and they removed Bolt of the Storm, and there were some pretty huge blows to Valla's kit. She had, like, even though you had the Storm of Vengeance and the upgraded Strafe, they weren't really that commonly picked because you needed the Bolt of the Storm for the survivability, for the escapes, or you would get Nexus Frenzy and just kind of play safer with the extra range and the extra damage. So they removed these, I think, probably because they were 2 generic talents that were getting picked a majority of the time, and they didn't like that. They basically split Nexus Frenzy up into 2 pieces. So the new pieces are, they moved Rancor to level 20. Rancor now does basically, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it greatly increases your auto attack speed. So it now actually, like, it scales with Hatred, and then once you get max stacks of Hatred, it actually increases your attack speed a little bit more. And then the other one is Fireflight Quiver. That's the range aspect of Nexus Frenzy, where they increase the range by 40% instead of the 20% from before. So that's pretty nice, but you give up a lot of DPS from Rancor when you pick this. So we'll talk about all of this a little bit more. Next, I really just want to talk to you about, we can skip this. This was the change that kind of brought her out of favor in the meta. This is when multi-shot was reduced and they kind of buffed up the auto attack damage. That's not too important. I guess I'll just show you some of the things. I guess I'll go through the talents here. We have Monster Hunter. This does extra damage to minions, monsters, and mercenaries. Caltrops, Hot Pursuit. Caltrops has been pretty interesting because they added this reward to it. It's now a quest talent that you can, after you have so many seconds at 10 stacks of Hatred, you get the Vault cooldown reduced. I think this is actually a really good level 1 talent. Hot Pursuit is really, really great. It's just like the old one, plus you gain mana.
Combat. Should we not join the queue?
Okay. Thank you, Valla. And so when you get to basically, this is one of those things that solves some of the mana problems, also allows you to chase. I'm not a huge fan of it, but since it's so like well-rounded, it just works really well. Monster Hunter is a little bit strange. It's cost-effective hero or cost-effective materials mixed in with extra damage to monsters. It can be pretty good if you're doing mercs. Although if you're doing any sort of an auto attack damage, tempered by discipline will help you out more. Puncturing arrow and punishment. Creed of the Hunter. Creed of the Hunter is a very interesting new one that increases your attack damage by quite a bit because your basic attack damage is not as good anymore. Have the W and the Q.
The worst part of hunting is the waiting.
Nothing really special here. It's pretty obvious if you're going W build, you go the W talent. If you go Q build, you go the Q talent. Auto attack, you go the trait build. Arsenal, pretty much the same. Death Dealer. This is actually a pretty good talent. This is what I typically do with auto attack builds. And of course, this is what you usually do with the Q build. Strafe, Rain of Vengeance. Most of the time, I honestly pick Strafe. I think Strafe is better than Rain of Vengeance right now. But it might just come down to personal playstyles. And in a little bit more, I would say, in a little bit more competitive atmospheres, Rain of Vengeance might be the more powerful ultimate. Hard to tell right now. Siphoning Arrow, tempered by discipline, Gloom. Gloom is the only talent that I think is actually really bad. It's basically an activatable spell shield where you delete all of your damage so that you don't die. And naturally, like, I mean, it's okay for you to say, like, you know, normally, like, if you're getting focused out and you're going to be trying to run away, and you would probably drop all your stacks anyway. I haven't felt that Gloom is really all that powerful. I'd rather have, especially when you don't have any sort of self-heal. This is the only self-heal that you get in Valla's kit now. They removed the Vigorous Assault, Vigorous Attacks from level 4. So unless you have like a healer, like a pocket healer just constantly healing you or whatever, I feel like Siphoning Arrow and Tempered by Discipline are just better and a lot more flexible.
The worst part
depending
of
on what you're doing.
is the waiting.
Level 16, Mana Core is way, way, way more powerful than it used to be. This is when she really starts to ramp up in damage. I still like Seething Hatred a lot because it just allows you to keep attacking forever. It really just depends on what you're doing. Probably, I think, as Valla develops and sees more play, we're probably just going to see only Mana Core here, and Seething Hatred's never actually going to be used. We'll have to see. I'm not entirely sure. And then Frost Shot, of course, is amazing. Vengeance. This is actually pretty good now that it heals you. It does extra damage, plus it heals you. So if I go Strafe, I almost always go Vengeance now, because I think it's really that good. For auto attack builds,
should we not join the queue?
There's typically Rancor and Fireflight Quiver. A lot of people like Rancor because it greatly increases your auto attack damage. I personally don't, because it won't allow you to kite correctly. And there's been a lot of discussion on this. It's like you can technically kite at the speed that Rancor does. I think it's like 2.21 attacks per second or something like that. But it's not easy, and you end up just not moving very far at all. Fireflight Quiver just keeps you really, really safe and allows you to really build up stacks really easily. So I just want to show you guys a little bit of her play, just so I can explain a couple of things. Biggest thing I've noticed, the first thing I noticed when I jumped into the game, is I realized that she has a little bit of cleaned up auto attacks. If you played Valla much before this rework, you'll notice that sometimes you could cancel your autos. A lot harder with the new Valla. She's just a lot more crisp and responsive, so that's one nice thing about it. So like if we do, like, for instance, like a standard auto attack is you're gonna go Hot Pursuit, Creed of the Hunter, Death Dealer, Rain of Vengeance, Tempered by Discipline, and probably for the sake of of this, I'm actually going to show you using Hatred, and then you go Rancor, right? So basically this this ramps up slowly. So this is the Rancor extra attack speed, right? You attack this quickly. You can technically kite like this, it just looks stupid and feels awkward. Like, this sort of kiting feels a lot more effective and standard. Like, this feels right. Like, when you're basically not moving while you're kiting, it just doesn't feel right. It's very strange. So that's why I think Rancor is not that good. And you can say, oh, Valla can just sit still and attack. You know, in theory, yeah, but like in practice, like when you're actually in the game, like, yeah, there's very little times where you can actually just sit here and be like, oh, I'm just gonna sit here and attack. It's very difficult for her to be in range and like just sit there and be able to attack freely without moving. It's not like Tychus. Like, Tychus has a fast attack speed that gets messed up. What you can do with Tychus is you can kind of dash inward and just kind of sit there on the tank for a little while. And it's okay, because he's tanky enough to deal with that. Valla is not. Valla is not the type of person who wants to be standing right up in a tank's face. So, I have a bunch of numbers that I'm going to show you guys. This is exhaustive notes that I took, basically. This basically shows everything that I really wanted to compare a lot of numbers and get the proper readouts for. So, without having to go through and actually show you guys all of this stuff, showing you at level 1, he now does a little bit more damage than PTR after they increased her basic attack damage in the latest patch. The patch before that, I think she actually did a little bit less. I'm not sure why the DPSs are different, just ignore that. I think I must have done something wrong, but she actually does more damage in the PTR, trust me. So the other thing is, once you get the max stacks, you just do a lot more damage, right? And this is just all of her base abilities. So the next thing I looked at was the auto build. I wanted to see like what happens. One of the biggest problems with the new auto build is you don't get your power spike until 16, whereas the old one got mana core at 4, and then got searing attacks at 7, and had like a huge power spike there. So as you can see, there's a pretty obvious difference. When you hit level 7 in live, you automatically have 500 DPS, which is insane. That's so much damage. Whereas the auto build now, when you hit level 7, you have 340 DPS, and after you get like 100 auto attacks on an enemy hero, it increases to 370 DPS. Which isn't a lot. That scales up a little bit more in the late game. The biggest difference to notice is just like right when you hit level 7, she does significantly less damage than she used to. She feels really useless up until she gets the mana core. Then at level 20, I did a test without Giant Killer and Executioner, just the basic auto attack build. Can't do it, I can't see it right now. Basic auto attack build. I didn't take Giant Killer or Executioner, and they wouldn't work on the dummy correctly anyway. And that came out to about 930 DPS. That's those mana core plus searing attacks, right? With Giant Killer and Executioner, it's very likely that you could get up to 1200, 1300 DPS, because stuff is actually insane right now. With the PTR build, I took it without mana core, because, okay, so I need to preamble with this. You can't use mana core on the dummy. A lot of people have been doing this, and it's actually not correct numbers, because mana core now does a percentage damage. The damage that you do to the dummy is not the actual damage. So a lot of people were doing this test and getting numbers like right around 1200 DPS, and that's not accurate, because it's actually hitting for 107 extra damage, which is 5% of 2140 max health. That said, it actually hits a little bit harder than the dust dummy, yeah, and the dummy test shows. So on most level 20 heroes, like for instance, tanks will have, you know, upwards of 5,000 plus health. You know, you can burn those down quite a bit. Like that's probably like around 1400 DPS when it's all said and done. But I did these tests without Mana Core just to show the basic damage that you do. This is what happens if you go for the other level 16 talent that ramps up Hatred a little bit faster. With the Krieg test, the Krieg quest complete, and you get around 800 DPS, which is, you know, straight up worse than the live. If you do get Mana Core, it ramps up to over 1,000, so it's actually pretty good in late game. But as you can see, it's very, very dependent on getting that Mana Core. If you don't have that Mana Core, then you really do a lot less damage. If you don't even get Rancor, if you don't get the attack speed, you do even less damage. You do 550, which is almost as much as this auto build at level 7 did. So, you know, do the math. That's not great. Next, I tested out the W build, which so far I found to be the most consistent and most powerful build in PTR. Basically, so the first test was I just did, hi kitty, goodbye kitty. First test was I did a W plus auto test just to see what it was like when you have the searing attacks plus the arsenal, because I think it's important to factor in the searing attacks at level 7 when you go for a W build. If you don't do searing attacks, then you do repeating arrow. And these might be a little bit closer with repeating arrow. But I'm pretty sure the W build in live will probably still do more. As you can see, it does 973 damage, it's 430 DPS. It does a lot more in the PTR, just because Arsenal plus Punishment actually do an insane damage, especially since W also got buffed in the PTR. So you can see already the W build is outscaling the live build in the PTR. But the only problem with this is you have to take into account that you have to get max stacks before you get damage like this. I didn't actually test it for without max stacks. I guess I probably could right now if I wanted to. Out of curiosity.
Choose a talent.
If we did it... I guess it doesn't really matter what I pick there. So, what is my test? My test is 3 autos. So, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so it's still a pretty decent chunk of damage. It's nothing to scoff at, indeed. The W build is still better on PTR in the early game. I still don't like that it takes you time to ramp up that W, so you can't really poke as well as you'd like. But we can see that it actually does do a lot more damage. And then at level 20, if you just do W plus Q, you get quite a bit more damage. And then I did W plus Q plus Strafe with the level 20 upgrade. Without the level 20 upgrade, we can assume it probably does approximately the same. Overall, I found out that over time, the W build in live sort of starts to catch up to the W build in the PTR, just because Strafe does more damage. If you go for Rain of Vengeance, I guess it really doesn't matter. I feel like Rain of Vengeance is something that you can get away with in this build, and it's not bad. And then I did one more with Searing Attacks just to play around with it, and you can actually increase this by quite a lot, Searing Attacks, than you would be able to in PTR without it. Finally, we move on to the Q build. So Q build is W plus Q with the repeating arrow. I did this in both, and as you can see, it does a lot more damage at level 7 with in the live version than it does in the PTR. Unfortunately, you have to understand this is also without the quest being finished from the level 4 talent. Now, when you have the puncturing arrow quest, So when you do finish the puncturing arrow quest, you actually do quite a bit more damage, like a ton more damage. Even with the double vault with tumble, you still don't get anywhere near the damage that you get from the W build in PTR, or sorry, the Q build in PTR. And when you add strafe with that, strafe, again, this is strafe being the evening out factor. Since strafe does so much less damage in the PTR, these are actually almost the same. But assuming you go anything else, it's a lot less. The important thing to note is just that her short-term burst, once you finish this quest, is actually pretty insane. She can duel really well and burst people down. So, getting all those numbers out of the way, that's Valla. If you want, I can probably post these somewhere so that you can look at them and compare. I would really like any feedback if you disagree with any of the numbers or you think that I did it wrong. This is basically me just trying to put numbers and figure out scientifically-ish how things will work the best. The next thing I just want to show you guys is the talents. All the different builds that I've come up with. So these are just builds that I have played around with. I've found to be pretty solid. This is a blank one. Auto attack build, pretty much always hot pursuit. Okay. Sad. Okay. Alright, we're gonna work this time. I really need ad block, by the way. Okay, so hot pursuit was Krita the Hunter. Death Dealer. Although pretty much anything works on this tier. You can honestly go anything. I typically go for a Death Dealer. Go for Reign of Vengeance, because that feels a little bit more in line with the auto attacks than strafe does, because you're basically stunning yourself for 4 seconds where you can't auto. Then level 13, I like Tempered by Discipline. You could technically go Siphoning Arrow, but since most of your damage is going to be coming from auto attacks, just your time is going to be spent auto attacking. Tempered by Discipline, of course. And then level 16, either Manicore or Seething Hatred. Like I said, I'm not entirely sure which one of these is better. I'm pretty sure Manicore is going to be the go-to talent just because it's so much better. But we'll see. And then at level 20, either Rancor or Farflight Quiver. I personally prefer the Farflight Quiver because I think the extra range is necessary since you don't have Bolt of the Storm anymore. It really depends on your playstyle and who you're playing against. You could go Rancor if you wanted to. I prefer Farflight Quiver. The W build is going to be Punishment and Arsenal, obviously. At 1, I found that pretty much any of these works. I think Caltrops is not bad for a W build, but you can honestly go Hot Pursuit, anything you want. I typically go strafe with this, and then either Tempered by Discipline or Siphoning Arrow. This is more of a poke-oriented build. I tend to go Siphoning Arrow, but you can also go Tempered by Discipline, depending on how much you auto-attack. It's kind of like the old W build where you could choose between Repeating Arrow and getting the... Am I saying this right? Yeah, Repeating Arrow, or you could go for the Siri attacks. So it's sort of that kind of qualm. It depends on whether or not you're auto attacking or you're throwing out more spells. At level 16, I usually almost always go Frost Shot. Obviously, that's what you want to typically go for when you go for this W build. But you could also go for Manicore. Again, that just depends on if you're doing more auto attack stuff. I mean, this is a viable configuration where you go Tempered by Discipline and go more into autos in the late game. Get more out of that. Like you still have the poke, but then you also have the autos. I almost always go Vengeance when I go strafe. But you could potentially, like I said, if you go for this auto type thing, you could go for Rancor or Farflight Quiver to follow it up. The Q build, pretty straightforward. Q, Repeating Arrow. This one is the only one that I think Strafe is pretty much mandatory for, because the whole point of this build is going to be to burst people down, right? So you go QQ, repeating arrow, Strafe, and then you get siphoning arrow for the heal, obviously. I prefer Frost Shot here because it allows you to kite more effectively. You can Q and auto a few times, and if they try to come after you, you basically W vault Q again. And then you also have the Strafe up, and with Vengeance, you also have another heal up. And that's also big because you have Blood for Blood anymore. So having both these heals together actually makes you pretty strong, and you can 100 to 0 people pretty quickly with this build. It's actually quite powerful. That's pretty much it for all of the builds. I think more or less that's everything that I had that I want to talk about. Overall, the biggest thing is that she feels a little bit cleaner and more consistent now. I'm not sure if she's necessarily going to be at the top of the food chain in the new meta. I think she's still too squishy, and sustained damage is not really. Game is still the meta is still really focused on stun and burst. I don't think this is going to be the right meta for her. We may see her come out eventually. I take that back. Stun and burst, she actually does pretty well in stun and burst because she can kite out cooldowns. We'll have to see how she works. I think it's still better to go for someone like Greymane or someone like Lunara. Even someone like Hammer right now I think is a little bit better. And Raynor is getting some buffs, so I think Raynor is actually not bad. It depends on the playstyle. I think if she does get picked, it's going to be largely because of her mobility and her ability to basically kite back cooldowns. But other than that, I'm not entirely sure this is the right meta for her. We'll have to see. We'll have to see where things go. I'm not totally convinced that she's where she needs to be yet. One of the Orthosbot just died to towers. So the general thing. Sorry, I'm too distracted by Orthosbot dying to towers now. So basically, what we're gonna see is her develop a little bit more over the next couple weeks. I think she still needs a bit of an auto attack buff, because the problem with her right now is she just gets like very little power late in the game. Problem is that early in the game she just kind of tickles, and it's not until she gets that mana core that she really starts to ramp up her damage and do quite a lot of scary time damage. There were several times when I was playing in PTR that I got soloed by tanks. Like a Johanna would just walk up to me and I kite her back, but like I couldn't stop her from nearly killing me. And it's stuff like that that's really obnoxious. We're gonna have to monitor. I think probably the best fix is gonna be raising her auto attack by just a bit and raising mana core from 5% to 4%, which will make her less reliant on the talent. That's pretty much it. If you have any comments, concerns, ideas about Valla and her rework, I would like to know. Let me know down below. I have a lot more stuff that I want to work on this week. I have an interview in the process, and I'm also going to be looking at more videos like this that I can do to kind of go really in depth to what a character is like, what are their strengths and weaknesses, and some of the changes that have happened to them over time, because that's something I feel really passionate about. So I appreciate all of you for watching. I hope you tune in next time, and I'll see you later.